Hi everyone, it's Sean Sandilands from Pulse Markets here. I'm lucky enough to be speaking with Justin Peters in this new year. As always, over Christmas, Leigh Creek has been busy, and we did get another Christmas present or New Year's Eve present this year. I just wanted to get an update from Justin, but first I'd like to say hi, and how are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Sean, and thanks for taking the time for this one, and Happy New Year to you and your team. Good. I mean, I just laughed when you mentioned that over the Christmas break, we've been working, got some news through. It's the third Christmas in a row that we've worked through Christmas. Families get annoyed over it, but COVID sort of changes Christmases anyway. So working from home over Christmas wasn't a burden. It was just business as usual.
Yeah, it's good to see when you're a shareholder like myself and my family. I was busy doing my work and in contact with you and Phil over the break, and it is very enjoyable to see you guys working your guts out to make us shareholders a lot of money. And that brings me to my first question. This Aboriginal heritage approval, I thought that was really significant, but I'd like to hear from your words. What is the significance of this announcement for Leigh Creek and us shareholders?
Well, the Section 23 was granted on the 31st of December by the Treasurer. It's under the Cultural Heritage Act in South Australia. It's extremely important. And perhaps if I give you a bit of background as to why it was important, then you get the understanding of what this actually means. When you're dealing with traditional owners, there are two basic issues you have to deal with. And the first of those is native title. Okay, so native title is not part of cultural heritage. Native title is a legal issue with regards to traditional owners of the land. The second part you have to deal with your traditional owners is in the cultural heritage issues, and I'll explain what they are as well. There is a third one, and that is the stakeholder engagement, where they live in the community, they're part of our community, and we want to do the right things by them. So there are three different sort of levels of scope in dealing with traditional owners. The petroleum production licence that we have is not subject to native title. So the native title issue is already resolved there. There are parts of the tenement not on the petroleum licence that are potentially subject to native title, and I can cover off on what that actually is. The second issue is the cultural heritage, and that is things like traditional burial sites, cave drawings and paintings, and issues of significance culturally to the traditional owners. Section 23 of the Act means that when we get an authorisation under Section 23, we still have to make sure that we do the right thing from a cultural point of view. So, for instance, if we find a burial site, or if we find something of cultural heritage or significance, we still have to protect it. We still can't go in there and just dig it up. So, for instance, there is a possible site on the petroleum licence, and that's fenced off. We fence that off, we just don't go in there. It's not a big area, but each time, if we find one, that's what we have to do. We also have to have what's called a cultural heritage management plan. And that's a plan that whenever we find something or come across something, there is a clear pathway forward on what we do to protect it. What Section 23 means is that we are protected as a company under the Act. And that is that we can go forward, right, and do our drilling, do our seismic. We can actually do the construction of stage one. And we're protected under the Act that as long as we have that cultural heritage management plan, as long as we comply with the Section 23, we're protected as a company where we can't be prosecuted for any inadvertent breach of that. We can't deliberately do something. The reason it's so important is that ATLA, the traditional owners, have been in administration now for over a year. And that's made it very difficult for us to sit down and negotiate with them on different issues on site. We have a cultural heritage management plan with them, but since they've been in administration, it's been much harder to actually deal with the individuals, and the Section 23 speeds things up for us, which means now that we can actually get the drilling done on site for the monitoring wells we want to put in for stage one. It means we can do the seismic now at site, and seismic's incredibly important for us because the seismic, particularly 3D, actually very accurately delineates where that coal is in the ground, which means that we have a very accurate understanding of where we're drilling and where we're targeting. So now that Section 23 has been granted, we can now get on site and do those things, right? Which means it now speeds up that process. It gives us certainty that we know that if we order the drilling rigs to come on site, we know there's going to be no delays. If we order seismic, we know there's going to be no delays. So that now allows us to move forward very quickly with stage 1.
Okay, thank you. That's awesome. That's really good to hear. On the 15th of December, and you may have just answered this question, your EPBC was withdrawn. And I know it was like doomsday on hot copper, which I was laughing at, but do you just want to talk about that EPBC withdrawal? Because I do know you've been copping flack unjustifiably so, and what that means.
Okay, so in any project like this, approvals are always the thorn in the side. They're always the issues that can drag projects out for a long period of time. If you have a look at projects in Queensland and Western Australia, the approvals process can take up to 8 years. Right? So you never know where you are in that path, because there can be objections, there can be appeals, etc. The EPBC Act is a federal act. It is administered by DUA, which is the federal department. Under that act, you have to refer your project to the department under certain circumstances. It was determined by DUA and by DEM, the South Australian department, that we're a coal seam gas project, right? And under that act, if you're a coal seam gas project, you must refer it to the federal government, to the EPBC Act, and have it assessed. We didn't agree initially, and that was that it was our view that we were not a coal seam gas company. We engaged our lawyers to look at the interpretation and go through the Act and go through the definitions of coal seam gas. Their determination was that we were definitely not a coal seam gas project, and therefore didn't have to refer it to DUA and under the EPBC Act. So we discussed it after we'd referred it to them. We discussed it with our lawyers, and we agreed that because we weren't coal seam gas, we did not have to refer it to the federal government for assessments. So the reason was for the withdrawal was there is plenty of case law on this. There's plenty of federal case law on this, that you can withdraw an application of a referral at any time. And we determined that to speed the process up for us, as we were not coal seam gas, as it didn't fit within part 3 because we were not coal seam gas, we withdrew that referral. It was nothing more than that. We withdrew it because it was wrongly referred in the first place. Now, people ask, well, why did you refer it? It was wrongly referred. And that was that we were pretty well instructed that the interpretation was that we were coal seam gas and that we had to refer it, and it would be quicker if we referred it to DUA. As I said, we didn't agree with that right at the start. And after taking advice on it from some very, very experienced environmental lawyers in Sydney, the advice was that we're not coal seam gas and that we could withdraw it. What that does for us is it means it speeds up our process as well. That doesn't mean at a later date we won't refer it. There might be some triggers under part 3 of the Act that we might have to refer it on, but currently we're comfortable we don't have to refer.
Okay, well, that's great. That's certainly...
What, just out of interest, Sean, what was the flack that we were getting over the withdrawal of that referral?
They were saying that it had been rejected. It's constant down ramping on the site by people who are just, I don't know, they're aggressive towards the stock. They're constantly saying negative things. Yeah. And they just took this as their Christmas present that Leigh Creek was stuffed. It wasn't going to happen. The project's over. And I just want to address this issue. And I won't say who they are, but they know who they are.
Yeah, well, it's the exact opposite. It is the exact opposite. The fact is that we didn't have to refer it because we're not a coal seam gas project. So therefore we withdrew the referral. So
the year and a half that it generally takes to get that approval, you don't have to get it anymore, just to be clear.
No.
Wow. Just on that, with this, the last one, and I want to touch on that one more time because I forgot to say something. With the significance of the recent heritage approval, there was one key sentence which I was actually dancing around my apartment, where it said, in light of the economic benefits to the state of South Australia, this has been approved. I mean, that's just a massive statement. I mean, weren't you happy when you saw that? I mean, I was over the moon.
The Treasurer came out with the announcement, was a media statement on the 31st. I read it, and sometimes you sit there thinking, I couldn't have written this better myself. Yeah. I agree with you that a lot of the comments he made within that were important, but I think people need to understand what he was saying within that too, and I can't speak on his behalf, but certainly from an interpretation point of view, I can say how I interpret it, and it was this. Under the Act, he has to consult with all stakeholders. So he has to go to the traditional owners, he has to go to the different groups, he has to go to government departments, he has to go and consult. But the granting of a Section 23 does not happen very often. I'm aware of 3 of them that have been granted in South Australia. When he goes to those particular stakeholders and discusses it with them and allows them to comment, he has to take that into account. He has to take their views and their comments into account, and he did so. But what he did say was that he has taken their comments into account, and the economic benefits of this project outweigh concerns, and that with appropriate conditioning within the Section 23, he can actually ensure that their concerns and issues were covered and protected within the authorisation, but that he would authorise the project because of the economic benefits for the state. Right, it was a great statement, and we'd been working for some time on this. There's a lot of work that had gone into this, but governments are also under a lot of pressure when they make these sorts of things. If you think of the Rio Tinto case in Western Australia, and you look at that, if you look at what goes on with traditional owners on important heritage sites, the government, it's not an easy thing for the government to do because they will come under criticism for this. So for them, their protection is they put conditions within that approval or that authorisation that ensures that we still do the right thing, but we have that protection of the Act.
That's just fantastic. It really was a Christmas, New Year's Eve present. It was wonderful. I saw it at 5:30 Christmas and New Year's Eve, and I had the biggest smile on my face all night. It was just wonderful.
It was extremely important. The other thing that's important to stress about the Section 23 is that was not the only way forward. If the minister hadn't granted the Section 23, there were still other ways we could move forward. It just meant that it was going to take longer. It meant there was more negotiations and consultation that was going to take place, but that we still could have got the same or a similar outcome without the 23. So it wasn't that if he didn't grant it, the world was going to cave in. It's just the fact that the minister did grant it meant that we have a surety now of moving forward and much quicker. And that was fantastic. And I agree with you. It's like we'd been working with the government for some time on it with our submission, and we had been discussing with them to hurry up and get that so that we could get moving at site, because every month there's a delay. Every month delay, costs us money.
Yeah.
And each month it's delayed, and you run into the danger now as well that remembering that the South Australian government goes into an election, I think in April or May, it's definitely one of the two, and that important decisions need to be made before they go into caretaker mode. And this is an important decision. So our concern was it could drift into that caretaker period. It didn't do so. Right. So we were very thankful we got it. And it was a great New Year's Eve present for quite a few of us. But for a lot of us, it was more of a sigh of relief than a point to celebrate. It was just that, okay, we can keep going. Here's another tick in the box for all those things we've had to do as a company.
Well, just while you've mentioned the tick in the boxes, I've spoke to some other fund managers, and I know you know who they are. I just wanted to say congratulations to you and the team. The box ticking that management have achieved over the last 4 years, every time you've told me you're going to do something. Timelines sometimes get blurred when you deal with governments. It happens. It's not your fault. It does happen in business. Like look at Ardini. He bought the mine, and then it took him 8 years to get the approval to mine.
Adani bought their leases in 2008, and they got their final approvals through in 2020. It took them 12 years to get all their approvals.
And look at Leigh Creek with the back noise of what happened in Chinchilla up in Queensland and the negative news there. What you've done in South Australia is just tremendous. And we're getting closer now. With that in mind, with the approval processes for stage 1 and 2, is there anything that's stopping us from proceeding at this point in time from a government and environmental approval process?
No. We have to submit the activity notification to the department now for the drilling of the monitoring wells and for the seismic. I would expect we'll have that submitted this week or at the latest early next week. That process is relatively straightforward. We've already submitted our statement of environmental objectives so that we have to comply with the conditions that are in the activity notification. But once we get that activity notification granted, then we're on site. we have drilling rigs ready to go, but we're not going to engage them until we get that activity notification finished.
Fantastic. So when do you think that would be for stage one? Because I know a lot of people are waiting for that to happen. Timelines do move. I do understand that, but what are you hoping for this year?
Look, it had the potential. The delay in the Section 23 had the potential to delay us by a couple of months, right? And we're not going to be fully aware of whether there's a delay of a month or two or not, because there are things we can speed up. So, for instance, we've already ordered the generators for stage one, and they should be arriving soon. So that's a long lead item that's coming pretty quickly. Piping is pretty easy. Getting a driller on site could be a challenge because of COVID. And so we don't really understand the impact of that, but we're pretty sure that the drilling company that we engaged last time, we're ready to go now. We think we might be able to get them on site fairly quickly, but that could be 2 weeks or it could be 6 weeks. We don't know. We're still online for stage one though. If you had a look at the investor presentation that we put out, that the timelines on the investor presentation had that we'd be commencing stage one sometime in February, and then we'd have it up and finished by the middle of the financial year in June. That's still on target. Right, and we can actually start to concertina some of those things in stage one so that we stay on track. So we're pretty comfortable that we'll be okay for stage one for that middle of the year operation. I think if you went back a year ago, we were hoping to have it up and running probably in the first quarter of this year, but no one could predict the effect of two things. One of those was COVID, and that does make a major impact on a whole range of things. For instance, if you're bringing something from overseas, if you're bringing piping from overseas into Australia, or the generators, for instance, a year ago, your time frame to get something on a boat and to Australia was around about 4 weeks. Now it's 3 months, right? So you're having that issue because of COVID, a shortage out there of shipping. So what's happening is things are being delayed. Now, we're pretty well on target as well for the generators. So we're pretty comfortable we'll be all right, and we can actually start doubling up now that we've got the Section 23 as well.
Fantastic. That's really comforting. I think that covers up all the questions of stage one. So with the last one, at the end of the financial year, in retrospect, you could be producing 5 megawatts, is what you say?
Absolutely.
And would that go into the grid?
Look, we can put it into the grid, but it's unlikely we're going to put it into the grid, and there's several reasons for that. One of them is that the moment you go into the grid, you become regulated from the federal government regulators on power. And whilst we can do that, we don't really want to go.
You didn't want to do that, yeah.
But we're going to need that 5 meg anyway at site. But we do have a couple of alternatives. We've had a couple of companies come to us that have got projects very close by who want to be able to buy that power off us. We have some other alternatives that we can use that power at site for. So the generation of those 5 megawatts of power is important for several reasons. One of those is that, firstly, it demonstrates that we're doing it 24 hours a day. We're producing gas 24 hours a day. We're generating electricity 24 hours a day. So it shows the capability. Incredibly important when you're looking at going to stage two, and you've got your BFS there, you've got your FID decision to be made. Your partners in this process take an awful lot of comfort out of the fact that you're producing out of multiple generators gas for 5 megawatts 24 hours a day. So I think from the confidence point of view from the market, that becomes really important, more so than simply selling 5 megs of electricity. Right? What that does for the project is far more important. And I remember very, very clearly in a previous project that I was involved in that I had Marubeni come to site. And Marubeni guys came out from Tokyo, came to site and stood there, and they watched the process from start to finish. And they saw the air being injected, and they saw the gas coming out of the ground at the other end. And their comment to me was, seeing is believing.
Yeah.
And they wrote a check out that day, right? Because they knew all the technical side of it. They understood it. Their experts understood the process, but seeing was believing for them, right? You simply had to inject air, right, into that seam, and you had gas coming out and energy coming out the other end, right? And that was very convincing. Go back to stage one, for us, it's going to be the same thing. With our partners, we have Daelim there, the BFS, and stage one becomes very important to them. We have other, and I can assure you, we have had other very, very serious players who have said to us, right, once you get that BFS in, we want to talk properly. And it's too early until the BFS is through. And then secondly, you want to get out the site and have a look at it. And we've taken groups out the site very recently, I might add, to have a look at the project, to see the infrastructure in place. And the comments we got from them was actually quite interesting, is that the first was that the rail line goes to site. Okay, so they see a path to commercial, that the rail line is there. The fact that there's an airport close by, the fact there's a town that's very close by, the fact that there's actually water facilities there, and there's a school, and there's a police station, and there's a highway that goes through, right? Those sorts of things are very important. And the only way you can show these people from overseas how that is the case is to take them there. Because it's very difficult for people who live in countries where, you know, from north to south of that country, it's 400 or 500 kilometres, and our project sits 500 k's from Adelaide. You know, it's very difficult in the concept of distance, of rail lines and that. So you take them and see it, and you get a very different approach the moment they actually physically see the site.
I think you're 100% bang on there. Showing the investors how it works is crucial. And I remember when I met you 4 or 5 years ago, when you're explaining what you wanted to do all that time, and you've done everything you've said virtually, except turn on the urea, which is, I can see that happening. You had all the infrastructure in play, and it was one of your big selling points why you actually chose the site all those years ago.
It's also a moving goalpost too. It's like when we started this 5 years ago, you know, your gas prices were sitting at a particular level. You didn't know whether the product you wanted to produce was to swing your syngas into pipeline gas and put it into a pipeline. You could work out the financials from that, but as I said, the goalposts move. You could go into the grid. You could make electricity, just put it into the grid. Sounds easy to do. The problem was that during that period of time, renewables just took force in South Australia and Australia-wide. And suddenly you didn't want to be competing in a renewable industry. So one of those options pretty well dissolved very early in the process. The gas one was another one that you could go, but then it became very clear to us years ago that we were better off going to a product like ammonia and then urea, because the margins were so big. I had no idea, by the way, when we looked at it, and I said before, when we did the BFS, we were $400 a tonne. That's what urea was selling at, 400 Australian a tonne. We had no idea that it was going to be sitting there at $1,400 a tonne today.
Come on, you had a crystal ball back then, didn't you?
Well, we thought it was going up. We didn't think it was going up that much, let me tell you. But you've got to remember, so our costs are fixed at the front. You know, we can produce gas at this price. You know, that's fixed. We have, you know, most of your labour costs, which are a large part of a project like this, are relatively fixed. You know, your CPI increases each year. You can predict 10 years out what wages are going to be. So you can get that front end. A lot of the product is off the shelf. Urea and ammonia plants are pretty well off the shelf. They're not cheap, but you can actually see what their prices are. All those costs have stayed pretty well online. You get a movement in that period of time. You know, like for instance, transporting anything from overseas is going to cost more and take longer. So you get a little bit of movement at the front end. So, you know, you could go up 10%, 20% over that period of time. No one predicted that the actual end product was going to go up 3 or 4 times that. And I've had some serious discussions with parties on offtake agreements, but also within that offtake agreement discussion, what they forecast urea prices to be in the future. And it's always very dangerous to forecast, right? Because no one would have predicted $1,400 a tonne today for urea. And if you look at the reason for that, it's because gas in Europe is so expensive. If you look at the fact that China now has actually banned exporting urea from China, and a lot of the urea that hits the world markets does come from China. And if you look at the American Henry Hub price, it's gone up. You couldn't have forecast any of those things. You could have forecast that, yes, gas might increase in America and Europe by a percentage, but not by the numbers they have in Europe. So we sit down and say, well, where do you think urea prices are going to go in the next couple of years? And it's interesting. You get a range, obviously. The pessimistic ones will sit there and say, oh, it'll be $800 or $900. The optimistic ones sit there and say it'll be $500 or $600. But the general consensus seems to be it's around about that $700 per tonne. Right, well, that's nearly double what we factored in originally on the PFS. So your margin just keeps growing. So we have this great luxury of having a fixed front end, and the back end just keeps growing on us. Where we're going to make the money just keeps growing. We wouldn't have got that in gas. We would not have got that in electricity. Right. So we've had to go through, as I said, a moving process of working out where we go. You know, it's quite possible, for instance, that ammonia might triple in price, and we might be better off on the next train, on the next 1 million tonne, going into ammonia and not urea. We just have no idea of forecasting those ammonia prices. Mind you, urea comes from ammonia, so they'll be linked anyway.
Yeah. With this Section 23 or the heritage that you had, the initial JORC resource that you did, it had some of the land locked up in the heritage area. Is there any chance of increasing what is already a significant resource into a larger resource?
So I think what you're referring to is like the PRMS initially was 1,053 petajoules as a reserve sitting there in 2P.
Yes.
On the PPL, so that got split into two. It got split into the PPL component, which is the 550 odd petajoules sitting within the petroleum production license, not subject to native title. And there's 400 odd petajoules sitting in PELA, petroleum exploration license, that possibly is subject to native title. So if we wanted to expand, so we've got enough gas, by the way, for the 1 million tonne. On our PPL, we've got enough gas.
Yep.
You have to remember that's not the full resource. If we drill more and prove up more gas on that PPL, right, we might have the possibility of being able to go to 2 million tonne purely on the gas inside that PPL. However, we do have, and it's an and or, it's not one or the other, we also have the ability to be able to negotiate with ATLA, the traditional owners, on that gas that's in that petroleum exploration license and bring that into the project as well. But that could take 6 months, it could take 2 or 3 years, but it doesn't bother us because we've got enough gas for that first stage at that 1 million tonne. If we need to expand, as I said, we have two choices. We either drill more up on the site, which we'll probably do anyway, and negotiate with ATLA.
Okay, fantastic. You were talking about the BFS earlier, and I mean, you've got to be living under a rock to not know, as you said, urea prices have gone through the roof, and with our fixed costs. We mentioned the BFS could be released around Christmas time. Now, you and I both know that, and I've been doing some other work recently, fund managers shut the shop from about the 21st of December, and they don't come back until at least after Australia Day. I'm trying to set up some meetings now and not bothering until the 31st week to do anything really until then. What's your BFS window, you think, that when you can release the BFS? Well, obviously, it's got to be ready, but how's that progressing?
So it's on track to start with. It's going very, very well. I would expect that we will have it finished. Where are we now? 12th of January. I would expect we'll have it finished sometime, hopefully early in February. It's an interesting point. We're dealing with 3 countries. We're dealing with Korea, and they worked through Christmas. So the input from Daelim was consistent through that period. Our team worked through Christmas on the inputs that go into the BFS. The French company, the French company that's doing it had a Christmas break. However, they're back. So it's not the 26th for them. They're already back at work. And one of the reasons as a company we came back on the 10th was that was when we were going to re-engage with them and see what work they've done over that Christmas period and get things moving on the BFS. It's on track. We have seen, sections of it where we put our input into it. So for things like forecasting on urea prices is one, Australian labour costs is another. It's a French company that's doing it. They're not familiar with the labour costs, so we have to work through those issues with them. But we're on track for the BFS. I've got no doubt we're going to get that BFS finished, and it's going to be a good one. I've seen comments that say, you've gone out to do a capital raise before the BFS is done. It must be going to be a bad BFS. Right? Well, that's absolutely ridiculous. Right? The fact of the matter is that, I've been.
You've got to pay for your BFS.
Exactly right. It doesn't come for one of the things that gets really concerning on this, Sean, is that I hate the idea of spending money in a company. I just hate it because you always have to go back for money. You've always got to go back to the market for money. And that's a real pain in the ass. So if we were a director's company, and there's plenty of them out there that do this, they'll do their cap raise for $2 or $3 million. They'll do nothing in the year, and they'll all have their decent wage, and they'll all be quite comfortable. And then they'll go back in a year or so's time with a couple of little announcements in there, try to keep the market all sexy and raise a little bit more money. Right. When you are doing a project, it costs money. It's as simple as that. When you are working on a project at the scale of this one with an ammonia and urea plant, it costs money. When you're engaging an EPC contractor the size of Daelim, it costs money, right? So you don't have the choice. So when you have 40 people on staff, it costs money, right? The great thing about it is that unfortunately, whilst the cash burn is high because we have people, because we're doing, a BFS, because we're doing a feed, because we're actually working with Daelim, the great thing is we're getting results for that money.
Yes, you are.
We're getting our results. The problem is we've got to spend it. And I can assure you with Phil, our MD, Phil's an accountant by trade. Accountants are the tightest buggers out there when it comes to money. He hates the idea of spending money. He doesn't hate it as much as me. The reason I hate it is because I've got to keep going back to the market and tap it. He hates spending it because as an accountant, he doesn't want to waste money or spend money.
I know the feeling. Okay, so the BFS is looking good. So the SPP for shareholders, potentially the BFS may be in that window, which is that'll be a major benefit to shareholders, realistically.
Yeah. The SPP timing, you can push back if you needed to.
It was very obvious to me the SPP was given as a present to shareholders, I thought, to people who have been loyal to the stock, who have been in for a long time. They've looked at, you go to the market. I mean, we did offer in July the 18-cent placement to as many people as we could who were shareholders, because a lot of the viewers who watch this would have got the email in regards to that offer. But it is nice to see right when it's a pivotal point. And I think you've mentioned that you've got some very big companies watching for the BFS. I think that'll be a pivotal moment for the company when that happens.
Was easy and it was complex. Okay, it was a no-brainer. We'd been asked by so many shareholders, why aren't we doing an SPP? Why aren't we giving them the benefit of a discount? Right, whereas we go to a fund manager, they get their discount to their clients. Why aren't we offering that to our shareholders? We've been asked that probably multiple times over the last 6 months. So the issue was, okay, let's do an SPP that does do that. Then the next question became, all right, well, then at what price do you do it at? Right, where do you do that price? In a lot of ways, I don't really care what price it is because it's for our shareholders, right? And that is that, yes, it's a reward for them. Okay, so you look at it, and I think when we announced it and closed on Monday, that was the date that you had to be a shareholder by was 5 p.m. on Monday. And I think we closed at 16 cents and we looked at that 15 cent. All right. And so we set the price at 15 cents. Some people sit there and say it's not enough of a discount. Well, it might not be enough of a discount if we're sitting there at 16 or 15 cents, but that's a decision for each of those shareholders, right? But if we're sitting higher than that, then that is a good discount and you can make that decision right up until close, right? And that's what we're hoping, is that the shareholders get that benefit. It's not a lot of shares. It's 33 million shares we've put aside for the SPP, right? You see that in the announcement with the attachment that went with that. That's not a lot of shares in the scheme of things. That will go to shareholders. It's not going to anyone else. It's just going to our shareholders. People concerned about dilution. It's not dilution because it's dilution to our current shareholders, not to a third party coming in and getting the benefit. But you can never keep all the people happy all the time.
No, notice that.
So for every 5 people that ring up and say, thanks for the SPP, you'll get 2 or 3 that are saying, oh, well, you mustn't be confident about what you're doing if you have to go back and tap the market. So you never keep everyone happy all the time, but we're comfortable with the SPP. And one of the issues I know had been raised, for instance, was, will the board participate in the SPP? And the answer for that is, I get pretty shitty over that question, right? But I will answer it. But I do get pretty shitty over the question because none of us know, none of our shareholders know, and I know none of the personal business of our shareholders do not know the circumstances or the finances of individual directors. But what I can tell you is this: our directors and their companies have put in more than $25 million of their money into this company. Secondly, you talk about skin in the game.
Can you just say that again? Sorry, because I think people need to hear this again.
Our directors and their companies have put in $25 million, almost $25 million into the company.
So that the directors and yourselves have put 25 million of your own money into Leigh Creek Energy
over the 5-year period. Okay, so there's your first point. Second point, you talk about skin in the game. I have 10 direct family members that are shareholders in this company. Right? I'm not talking about long lost cousins. I'm talking about sons and daughters and brothers, right, who are all shareholders in the company. I can't speak on behalf of the other directors, but I can say this: I'm participating in this SPP.
Well, that's wonderful. If for anyone who's had any doubt whether or not the directors are participating, there's 25 million reasons that
they're already there. And I know,
yeah.
I know I will not be the only director participating in the SPP, but I'm not prepared to speak on their behalf because it's their own circumstances and finances, that it's their business, not mine. But we've already committed to this company financially and will continue to do so.
That's wonderful. Wow, that's just a big, massive tick, a big tick. That's huge. I think it's very important. I haven't heard that before about the 25 million. And I think it's great you've brought it up, because one of the things that investors love to look at, and there's actually websites that actually track directors buying and selling shares. Like you look at Kogan, when he sold shares, the share prices never recovered. Same with Afterpay, but that's a different kettle of fish because of the tech crash. But that's really good to hear. That puts a lot of people's minds at rest. 25 million is a big number.
Yeah, but also, Sean, people don't understand the dynamics of a company. Well, some will obviously understand it, but some people do not understand some of the dynamics. One of those being directors are in blackouts for very large periods of the year. Secondly, and this is more importantly, if we're in the middle of negotiating big contracts, the one we were doing with Daelim for that period of time, the offtake agreement that we're working through with Daelim now, the other ones we're talking to and dealing with.
You're not allowed to buy shares.
Well, it's insider trading.
Yep. So I think investors need to know that too. And the problem is because you're not sitting idle, you're not twiddling your thumbs doing nothing, just getting your dividend or your director's fees. Yeah. If you look at your history from your ASX announcements, there's always something going on.
Right. And you've got to weigh up as a company, certainly at the directors level, you've got to weigh up, is it, because in the board papers, the things that are happening and the work that's going on and getting close on some and where we are, that even though, yes, you haven't signed a definitive agreement and announced it, right, that could happen at any time. And if you've been buying or selling, then you run into that danger, right, of that insider trading. Now, that doesn't apply to an SPP. Right, you can actually participate in SPP. That's not an issue whatsoever. That fits outside of that because all shareholders have been given that opportunity. Right, so you can participate in those SPPs without running that danger of insider trading. But that's always the situation, and Phil and I have discussed this many times. And because we're directly involved in negotiations of each one of the things we're doing, we know exactly where we are. The ability for us to buy and sell is almost zero because we're always involved and know more than the market does.
I'm pleased that you've said that today, because I think a lot of shareholders need to understand that you have put a lot of your lifetime and energy into this, and your time and money, that you can't be buying and selling all the time. You can't be adding to your shares because you just simply have got too much going on in the background.
Yeah, and you've always got to, from a governance point of view, you've always got to take that into account. That always has to be part of that consideration. So when you sit down and say, oh, well, I've just come outside that blackout window, that gets put on companies, and you go, all right, well, now I can trade. And you're sitting there going, well, hang on, we're negotiating this and we're negotiating that. If one of these comes off, right, then if we've been buying or selling, then we run into that danger as well. So it's always complex. As I said, these issues are never simple. Things like trading and buying, things like skin in the game, things like your approvals are lengthy, complex processes. They are not just simple knee-jerk sort of comments and decisions.
Excellent. One of the other things, you've got the BFS coming soon. I think in November you announced a heads of agreement with Daelim to do a 500,000 tonne a year offtake.
Yeah.
That's had a 4-month window, and I think that's obviously based on a BFS being positive that potentially could go from a heads of agreement to a binding offtake. What do you think the timeline of that would be? Because that's obviously another massive tick in the box.
I think there are two things with that. I think the first is that I would be amazed if it takes that full period of time for us to go to a definitive agreement on an offtake agreement with Daelim. You're right that the BFS is important, and it is an important part for them. But I think also what's important, to be fair to Daelim, is that whilst they have a trading arm, and they do have a big trading arm in chemicals and in particularly in petrochemicals, they have not got a lot of experience in fertiliser markets. So they've wanted to do a fair bit of work on research, understanding the markets, talking to the traders, talking to other players, to be comfortable that there is a market out there for urea. It sounds ridiculous when we say it, when we know, that urea gets sold in Australia, gets sold around the world. It's a commodity that gets traded every day. Its prices are pretty well clear, that you can see where they've been and where they're going within a certain range. But for a company like Daelim, who is a conservative company, a large company with a lot of credibility, who gets things right when they do it, these sorts of decisions have to be right for them. So they've had to get comfortable with what the market is to actually go ahead with that agreement. That's why I say I'd be absolutely amazed if it goes to the full length, because it doesn't take that long to get comfortable with that. So I think you'll see that you'll get a congruence of them being comfortable, which they are now, and the BFS will lead to us coming through with something fairly definitive, and something definitive, not fairly definitive, something definitive very soon. But also, we're in talks with other parties at the moment on the balance. And I would expect that you'll see something with regards to the balance of the fertiliser.
So this is all exciting. So the next 2 to 3 months, there's a lot going on.
There's always a lot going on. It's like, first day back yesterday. And I said,
you didn't really have a break.
What meetings? I said, what meetings you got today? And he laughed, because it was just so many that they had going, and they were all important meetings. Nearly all of them were important. That he was flat out from day one back at this. We say the next 2 or 3 months. If you think about it, we're going to have the BFS will be finalised in that period. We'll have started stage 1 out at site during that period. We'll have got the generators on site during that period. We will have, hopefully, that Daelim finalised the agreement on the offtake with them. And I'm hoping we'll have some other announcements to go with that as well. So there's a lot of things that are going to happen over the next 2 or 3 months. Some of those will happen early, some of those will happen later. We're in discussions from a business development point of view, and I've alluded to this in a couple of previous statements. We've been approached by several companies for projects, one within Australia, one on the subcontinent, and one in South America. Those discussions are ongoing and getting far more detailed and coming to a point of completion. They're important for us because they give us another project. You've got to be careful when you do this, however, that you don't lose sight of your key project, your major project, and you don't take away resources from that project for others. But equally, you have to have that pipeline going. We're starting to lock down Leigh Creek's project now. There's opportunities overseas. You think about the amount of ammonia nitrate that's needed in some countries. In some countries, electricity is a major issue that need that. You can do this from UCG. Some countries want ammonia to go to urea. So we've been approached by government in one circumstance, but we've also been approached by private companies, and we're looking at those. I think it's likely in the next 2 or 3 months you will see an announcement of a significant one coming through on one of those as well.
Congratulations, that's awesome. We're touching on one last thing, and then I'll just get you to give me a summary of the next couple of months, which I think you've just pretty much done anyway. The management team, you've got so much going on, and I do commend Phil, yourself, Christian, and the team for doing such a fantastic job last year and continuing into this year. Are there any additions you're thinking of making just to strengthen it? Because obviously this is a huge point of growth for the company. Stage 1 commencing, stage 2 looking at potentially getting FID at the end of the year. I'm not sure if you need a urea specialist, because clearly you know what you're doing, but do you need help?
Look, it's a good question, and it's a balancing question. People often ask this about the board, which I'll come to as a separate part of that question. But you can bring people on. We can go out and get, Australia's best urea trader, someone who's got big experience in it. But that costs money. So you sit there and balance. Okay, if you've got your offtake agreements done, if Daelim are going to construct and they know what they're doing, where are you going to start spending that money on employment on? Now, there are a couple of positions that we are looking for at the moment, right, from an employment point of view, to fill certain areas that we need to improve internally on our skill sets. But it's once again, it's just it's a straight out cost curve. You know, if we have all the funding in place for the project at 2.3 billion and we have, you know, operating capital sorted out for the next 2 years, then you don't even worry about it. You just go and employ them. Right now, we're not at that point. So we have to really pick the eyes out of which skill sets we need internally and take them on. Or do you do it consulting, for instance? Are you better off employing a consultant firm to do a whole range of work for you so you don't have to pick up things like long service leave, annual leave, work cover, and those sorts of requirements? So you've got to have that balance between the two. And we've got lots of consultants, by the way, that are working for us. If you look at Engage, if you look at Daelim, if you look at the French company that's working on the BFS, they're all experts in their field. We go to, you know, PwC, KPMG do their work for us as well. We've got experts out there. One of the questions I often get asked is the board strong enough? And I think I'd answer that two ways. We're definitely looking at increasing the strength of the board. There's no question about that. And when I say looking at it, I'm saying we've had interviews. We've been interviewing parties along these lines for someone to fill in, right, in a particular skill set. So someone who's built an ammonia plant, or someone who's built, you know, $2 and $3 billion projects we've been talking to. We've been talking to one of the leaders in urea and fertilizer industry now for the last 5 years, that we haven't been talking for 5 years. They've been a leader for 5 years, and we've been talking to them only in the last month. So we're looking at strengthening the board, but I don't want to rush into it. I do not want to rush into it. I don't want to find that, you know, we've suddenly got an extra couple of board members and we made a wrong decision, and you get yourself into a position where you've got to thin back the board because you've got too many on the board. I want to make sure it's right. I'm comfortable with the board we've got at the moment. Yes, we will strengthen the board. There's no question about that. And I would expect we'll do that in the first 6 months of this year, but I do not want to rush into it.
That's smart. That sounds great. Well, listen, Justin, I think I'm really comfortable with what you've said. The next 2 to 3 months, I'll just summarise with the offtake, with the BFS coming out, you're quite comfortable that's going to look good. That's a very important document which will lead to quite a few different parties, which you've mentioned, which have taken a serious look at you. It'll be very interesting to see what happens. Is there anyone looking at investing into the project that are waiting on the BFS? You got different parties lined up?
Yes.
Or?
Yes.
Yes.
It's a simple answer.
Yeah.
So that said, let's see where that all goes. You've always got to be dangerous about over-promising and getting people all excited about, you know, where it's all going, and then it drags on for each one of them. All I can say to you is everything I've said to you will happen. It will happen.
It always does. It always does.
And your comment earlier was that we always deliver on what we said we'd do. That is true. However, there are times there where, you know, you wanted something to happen 6 months ago and it's taken 6 months longer. It's possible that could happen to any one of these things I've said today, but we will deliver on them.
Yeah. Well, I'll call you the postman sometimes because you certainly do deliver. But listen, I'll end on the comment from the South Australian government that in light of the economic interests, they wanted this to proceed. I mean, that's coming from the Premier and the Treasurer. Yeah. That's just beautiful when I heard that. So that, I just wanted to say congratulations. I thank you very much for your time.
Yeah,
and it's been a pleasure.
All right, great. Thanks for that, Sean, and we'll update soon.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks, mate. Bye.